Let me now turn to an old and dear friend, someone with whom I worked many years ago, and someone who is one of the great driving forces at APCSS. Professor Kerry Nankivell, I'd like you to come forward if you'd be so kind, and to address us on the issue of where the land meets the sea, a geostrategic overview of the Asia Pacific.
Merci mesdames et messieurs, me fait grand plaisir de retourner à Victoria après plusieurs années, particulièrement à l'invitation d'Admiral MacDonald, Commander Marpak, et son conseiller, Dr. Jim Boutillier. Like so many Canadians, Dr. Boutillier was my first and best teacher of all things maritime. So it's really a great honor to be able to address him, Admiral MacDonald, Admiral Swift, and this distinguished audience on a topic of great importance, not just to those of us who live and work in Honolulu near Pearl Harbor, but those of us who live and work on the seas and by the seas all over the world. My name is Kerry Nankivell, and I'm a professor at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu. I've been asked to set the stage for the next 3 days of discussion by offering a portrait of the geopolitics of the region and the ways in which it changes the seascape. But as I sat down to prepare my remarks, with all due respect to him, I began to understand that the question that was put to me was altogether backward. And in fact, it's the seascape which is defining the geopolitics of Asia in today's oceanic age. I have big ambitions for this short talk. I'm going to do my best to offer a portrait that will be the backdrop and allow the expert panelists that Jim's staff has put together to get into the details of the important themes that are facing us as security practitioners. And I'm going to draw on some of the themes already introduced by Admiral MacDonald and offer to put a little bit more paint of the canvas. I think that we all read a lot about the Pacific Century, and a lot of ink has been spilled trying to uncover what exactly that means. While a lot can be said and has been said on this topic in recent years, there are two fundamental observations that I would ask you to bear in mind as frames for your understanding of the issues that we'll explore together in this room. The first is that while the Asia-Pacific century has been most spectacularly visible in China in the post-Mao era, Asia's maritime rise has in fact been much more broad-based than that, and much more sustained than just the last 2 decades. And the first movers in this trend were in fact not found in mainland China, but on the periphery or the fringes of the East Asian continent. The first movers were, of course, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, probably in that order, although that's up for academic debate. The second observation that I'll offer you, which underlies the first, is that the headline story of Asian sea power in our age is not, in fact, a military one. It's commercial. The leading edge of the dramatic change in the region that is shown on the slide behind me has not been primarily about a revolution in naval sea power, although we're seeing that now, or growing naval ambitions, but changes to commercial exploitation of the sea as the most efficient means of transportation, even in the modern age. Shanghai and other Asian megacities before it are profoundly connected to the sea. Though China's embrace of its blue economy is unprecedented in scale, it has captured all of our imaginations. Deng Xiaoping actually borrowed liberally from a model that was offered to him by other neighbors first. That model had a couple of pillars. The first was strong economic engagement of the United States and the Western economies. export-led growth in technological fields, which allow the opportunity to move up the value chain. Large mobilization of state capital for investment in maritime infrastructure, and government support for capital-intensive maritime industries, including shipbuilding and some others. These were the building blocks of Japan's post-World War II economic recovery, and the path to the development of world-class economies in some very unlikely places, like Singapore, with a population of 5.5 million, that nonetheless supports, maintains, and grows an economy of enviable scale. A recent study completed this year in China confirms what most of us have already suspected, that there's a near perfect correlation in that statistical analysis, a correlation of 0.99, between growth in China's so-called blue economy and the wider national economy. Though comparative data is not yet available, we can suspect that the same pattern would hold true in those other maritime economies that I already mentioned. So Asia's broad maritime rise, which has literally lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the span of no more than a generation, is perhaps better described as a reawakening rather than a rise. If one takes the very long view of economic history, we see that despite Asia's impressive double-digit growth in GDPs in recent years, its major powers still have some room to grow before they regain their historical average contribution to the world economy. Data from economic historians, like the one pictured here, tell us that at one time, China, India, and Japan alone counted for more than 2/3 of all of the economic activity on our planet. Today, they only claim half that, despite commanding more than half the world's territory and population. So if history is our guide, we should expect that Asia has not yet reached what it is already clearly demonstrated is its impressive potential. But of course, what Asia has accomplished is staggering, and it's largely premised on what you see behind me. The result, of course, is the enmeshment of Asian economies in global supply chains. But the means has been revolutionary changes not in what we trade, or even in what quantities we trade it, but how we move things between our producers and consumers. Containerization is described by transportation analysts as the third revolution in global trade, which has had impacts similar to the development of steam and the extension of rail lines across the continents. Although the technology was developed in the United States, arguably it was perfected and scaled up first and most importantly by Asia. Asian governments were the first movers in the market, making the right infrastructure investments at the right time to capture today the top spots in what has become a highly stratified and difficult to penetrate market. So behind me you see the Maersk EEE, which up until very recently was the world's largest container ship, capable of carrying 18,000 steel boxes. And though it's US flagged, it was not US built. These industry cutting-edge meters are built in South Korea, which has cornered the market in high-end shipbuilding, although China has established itself as the world's most prolific shipbuilder, capturing much of the rest of the market. This vessel, at 400 meters long, is 17% larger than a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, although with less firepower, certainly. And despite its size, in a single journey, it can transit from Singapore to Spain in 20 days. The vessels gain economies not just of scale, but also of fuel costs, representing a 99.5% emissions reduction on air freight and 18% reduction on emissions from rail, which make it not just more profitable in terms of the energy costs involved in large-scale transit, but also more sustainable. To take all of the EEE's merchandise by rail would require a train no less than 110 kilometers long, a feat impossible, at least by our current understanding of the laws of physics. The cost savings that the EEE and others like her offer means that transportation costs have virtually ceased to be an important factor in trade or investment decisions around the world. Today, transportation costs represent on average only about 1.5% of the retail cost of any finished good, which is an amazing expression of the depth and scope of our globalization when you think about how many thousands of miles the component parts of the iPhone or Samsung phone that most of us carry in our pocket have traveled before they got to the shelves. And with profit potential like that, it's no wonder that containerized trade continues to explode as innovators around the world figure out how to containerize more and more of the things that we trade. So we started first with component parts of electronic goods, primarily moving from Asia to North American and European markets. And now we're figuring out how to trade food in refrigerated containers at longer and longer distance. And even how to containerize bulk commodities, not because it's necessary, but because it's much more profitable. Since 2001, and even given the global financial crisis setback in 2008, the volume of containerized trade around the world has trebled from just over 200 million TEUs in 2001 to around 630 million in 2013. Moreover, Asia's share in handling those boxes has also grown, although modestly. So enviably, Asia is the beneficiary of a growing slice of a growing pie. The megaports that load and unload these vessels not only serve their own communities, they also serve their national hinterlands, of course. They're gateways which have linked cheap Asian labor with Western consumers. And increasingly linking manufacturing in developing Asia with customers in developed Asia farther north. And recent studies out of the World Trade Organization tell us that the most important trade routes in the not so very distant future will link northern developed Asia with developing Asia farther south and will not be east-west at all, which will represent a major change in global trading patterns that has held for several centuries. But these megaports are also transshipment platforms that redistribute the goods that make up the global economy. As cargoes move from motherships like the Maersk EEE to feeder lines around the region. And transshipment and ability at it is why Singapore, with a population of 5.5 million, can nonetheless catapult itself into the forefront of the region's economies. So the headline of Maritime Asia is commercial. That has been the first act. But of course, in that story, a second act complemented the first rather quickly, and it's a military one, and it might be more familiar to this audience, and it'll certainly make up much of the discussion we're going to embark in over the next few days. Growing stakes in global sea lanes, growing budgets thanks to increasing GDPs, has rather naturally given rise to growing naval capabilities in East Asia. And Deloitte's 2016 Global Defense Outlook did a review of the world's 50 largest economies, and which offered us a look at 5-year forecasts of both GDP growth and growth in defense spending. A number of Asia's major players show up in the top right-hand corner of this graph, the high-growth, high spenders. Notable in this category are India and China, which as the second and fifth largest regional navies already are starting from an impressive base, but plan more than 5% year-on-year growth in defense budgets over the next 5 years. Indonesia is projected to have the highest spending, of course starting from a much lower base, and so perhaps will be less dramatic change, but is notable nonetheless, and is at the forefront of new maritime players that will, for the first time, move into an entirely different category of technological capability and sea presence. Some of Asia's already capable, already developed economies, like South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan, are in the second category of higher growth balancers, projecting increases in defense spending of around 3%. Which is rather modest, but year on year this will translate over 5 years to an overall increase in defense spending of 10% by 2020. We should acknowledge that in East Asia there are a few economizers. Although it's worth noting, at least in the case of Japan, which shows the smallest and actually a decrease in overall defense spending by 2020, changes to the way Japan employs its already capable maritime services are probably more interesting to the analyst than spending patterns overall. So given the state of affairs, the question for students of Maritime Asia is, does all this spending amount to an alarming arms race or badly needed modernization? Well, there's a lot of debate and discussion, both in the practitioner and academic communities on this question. But for me, I don't think that it's an either-or proposition. And I certainly don't answer that question at once in reference to all of Asia's diverse maritime players. Clearly, if you count yourself as a person who believes that navies and coast guards are the good guys in regional security, as I do, more capability is a good thing. It means that more regional states are better able to police their patch of ocean and contribute to our shared prosperity. It means that more players can make meaningful contributions to some of the coalition missions that were already described by Admiral McDonald, and to exercises like the US-led Rim of the Pacific exercise held every 2 years in the waters off of Hawaii. The impressive scope and diverse configuration of exercising patterns and the ways in which they're changing provide ample evidence in favor of this argument that more capability is a good thing. Arguably, everyone benefits when sea services like the JMSDF and the Russian Navy conduct search and rescue exercises together and in a cooperative spirit in the North Pacific. When the People's Liberation Army Navy of China and their Russian counterparts travel together as far as the Bering Strait. And when the previously bilateral exercises called Malabar between the United States Navy and the Indian Navy include new partners, including the Japanese, and potentially the Australians. The exercise pictured here is from the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus Maritime Security Expert Working Group exercise in 2013. And it's just one demonstration of how regional modernization in an area where sea power used to be rather modest and professionalization only small, can now today contribute to regional stability and security over some of the world's most important sea lanes. But of course, we'd be remiss to be too Pollyanna-ish about the consequences of modernization. Recent developments in the South China Sea in particular remind us that naval developments and changes in the attendant Air Force postures and missile capabilities can and often do, too often in fact, unsettle regional relationships. China's massive land reclamation projects in the Spratly Islands are an impressive feat of engineering, and modernization of its infrastructure in the Paracel Islands slightly to the north and west, such as the one pictured here. This is Woody Island, and it's home to new surface-to-air missiles operated by Chinese forces and home to a new airfield. Remind us that although capability is generally a good thing for both national and regional security, when it's conducted in contested zones or in disputed territories, and where the intended peaceful use of those capabilities is not at all obvious to regional neighbors, there's a lot of cause for concern, and there's much work to be done in terms of fostering dialogue. I should say, and this is a theme that I'm sure we'll explore in the next few days in some detail, the South China Sea is a particular area of concern not because of the existence of disputes. It's important to remember that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is still rather new, only having come into force in the mid-1990s, and that for a long time, disputes over where the lines in the water should lie were the rule and not the exception. So the fact of disputes is not what's concerning. It's the manner in which some rival claimants pursue these disputes which is the most cause for concern. The South China Sea in particular is characterized by legal and political complexity, as well as significant strategic ambiguity, not just with respect to the claims themselves, but also to very capable and interested stakeholders farther afield, that create the possibility for dangerous miscalculation or misreading of one another's intentions, and challenge us to deal with the sensitive military issues with particular skill. So although Asia's maritime reawakening, both commercial and naval, is undeniably a success story, the region has a lot of work to do before it can and will be up to the task of managing the shared success so that the benefits can accrue widely. To finish where we began, part of this state of affairs reflects the reality that Asia's maritime rise is not yet complete. Despite staggering successes, there are still significant pockets of have-nots in the Asian seascape. The growth of maritime-based economies in East Asia, for example, have not yet translated into similar broad growth patterns around the littoral and the Indian Ocean. There are too many maritime communities that operate as they have for centuries and find that globalization has probably made their jobs quite a bit harder rather than the opposite. These small-scale commercial fishermen in Chennai, India, are using technologies not so different from technologies employed centuries prior. And for them, the most tangible evidence that they have of globalization is increasing amounts of plastic and other garbage that fill their nets, and dwindling fish stocks, both the results of vigorous and enthusiastic wide-scale exploitation of the sea, which they have not been able to take part in. And still others, determined to play their part in the rise of Asia, take to the sea as refugees, asylum seekers, or irregular migrants in search of work, and sometimes have become victims of criminal activities at sea. This picture is one of several vessels that were found drifting in the Andaman Sea off the coast of Thailand in May of last year, carrying thousands of Rohingyas from Myanmar in search of a better future. The sea may be familiar to some of the people here who took part in the irregular landings of Tamil Sri Lankan nationals to Canada in 2009-2010. It's becoming increasingly clear, either to those in Canada and those on the Asian continent, that these communities that haven't participated in Asia's maritime rise are not just humanitarian cases. They are direct challenges to sovereignty, to security, to stability and prosperity of those that have benefited from globalization. The sea has become an arena for their ambitions and pursuits, which too often include human trafficking, drugs and arms running, large-scale illegal fishing, environmental degradation, and even modern slavery at sea. The continued dislocation of Asia's most unfortunate communities creates clear us versus them dynamics between legitimate sea powers and criminal spoilers. This us versus them dynamic also has consequential impact on regional cleavages that negatively impact diplomacy. ASEAN, for example, even as it moves to consolidate itself as a single economic community, which it announced this year, is increasingly challenged by the gap between rich ASEAN and poor ASEAN. This gap plays itself out most prominently in diplomacy around the South China Sea disputes. Understandably, those countries with the most at stake in global sea lanes, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, are the most incentivized to manage the South China Sea disputes in a productive and friendly manner. Those countries with little to no meaningful stake in global sea lanes, Cambodia and Laos, for example, have very little incentive to expend local capital on regional maritime issues and have become part of an unfortunate fissure in ASEAN as an organization itself. Surely part of the solution to this problem is about expanding broad-based economic development to ensure that everyone is enjoying the benefits of the sea, and therefore that everyone remains committed to its continued good governance and open access. In sum, Asia's maritime future has yet to be written, and those of us working and thinking about the sea in this age are incredibly fortunate for being able to either play a role or at least watch it as its future unfolds. We're at a moment of challenge in which all of our diplomatic skill, patience, and strategic vision will be tested. Contemporary Asia represents our collective success. Asia is healthier, wealthier, more capable, and more forward-looking today than it has been in centuries. And we will have our work cut out for us as we manage this shared success. Admirals, I look forward to the next 3 days of discussion, and thank you, Admiral McDonald, for inviting me and DKI EPCSS the opportunity to be part of the discussion. I'm very much looking forward to your deliberations.